that's been proposed recently from several quarters is that the U.S. should rescind the most favored nation
I
trade
think that would be a
status
great idea.
from
Right.
China,
For
which
the most favored nations, not everybody knows what that is because it's an old term. So you want to explain it or I can explain it?
why don't you go ahead?
The idea is that if you have a treaty with one nation, and like whatever, you have treaties with a lot of nations, and whatever is like the best terms of like your best treaty, anyone with most favored nations gets the same favorable terms as like your best trading partner.
Essentially, it allowed a huge amount of free trade, more or less, with
Right.
China.
It's like any great deal that we have with, Canada or England or Germany or whatever, like that China would get like the same terms. But that's stupid because what China does is steal American stuff. They subsidize state-owned and even private industries to artificially outcompete. They abuse workers' rights. They emit more carbon than the rest of the developed world combined. And they're also trying to completely undermine our country. So it does make sense to not treat them as a normal trade partner.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the car thing, Volkswagen just announced also that they needed to pull out of China because their factory in Xinjiang, guess what, is implicated in slave labor.
No, Volkswagen.
But
But they've been
the
such
single solitary stain on their history.
the interesting thing, Volkswagen has been in China since
They were one of the first,
80s,
right?
Yeah,
right? They were
right,
like
yeah.
early, yeah.
But the interesting thing is that then they announced that they were pulling out of China and they were going to close this factory in Xinjiang. And then they announced that they're going to double down on their, they have like a relationship with a Chinese car manufacturer. They have like I don't remember what it's called, but essentially they have a relationship with a Chinese car manufacturer and they're going to double down on that.
Can that Chinese partner use slave labor?
Probably.
Well, then it's
I mean,
okay.
I think they might be required to use slave labor.
Well, a lot of people are actually very comfortable with slave labor as long as they're not the ones who actually have to own the slaves.
Well, do you see the thing recently about Italian tomato products having Xinjiang tomatoes
Oh yeah,
in
like,
them?
Oh,
Uyghur
God.
slave labor tomato in
Yeah.
Italian.
And
That's bad.
Uniqlo had to come out with a statement saying that they don't use any Xinjiang cotton, so that
Mhm.
their cotton is slave labor free. And then now they're probably going to get boycotted in China
Or there
because
was
they're not using Xinjiang cotton. So the CCP is trying to force companies to use Xinjiang cotton,
which
and
would
Xinjiang
essentially make
tomatoes.
them choose between the China market or the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, in the U.S., especially with the Uyghur Forced Labor Act, that is now
Yeah.
illegal to import things.
Yeah, there was
that,
the parent company of Tommy Hilfiger, like they got sanctioned, I think, by China for not using Xinjiang cotton.
This is why, slavery has historically been in a lot of different cultures, but it's always been very difficult to get rid of for this very reason, right? Which is that the slave owners, and in this case, the slave owners are the CCP. They not only have their own interest in maintaining the slave labor, but they also use their power to force people to be a part of that system. And I believe that to have been the case historically in the U.S. and other places. So like even though almost nobody actually wants slavery, but the slaveholders try to force people to be in that system. So then it makes it very difficult to eradicate. And the only solution is to really truly eradicate slavery everywhere in every country. And it's just so hard to do.
There are more slaves now than there were at any point in history.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking about Star Wars lore.
I'm thinking about, I started reading that book you recommended, The Years of Rice and Salt.
Oh, you did? Wow, cool.
Yeah, so it does have some stuff about slavery and some other stuff.
I recommend that book to you, dear listener.
I'm only on chapter 4, so I just started reading it, but that's a great book.
I don't know how he assimilated so much knowledge, the author.
Oh yeah, and like but like it starts off in this guy. He's like a Mongolian warrior. He's like walking alone across like
Yeah, he
all
was
of
part of
the
some kind of
like the stands.
Yeah, he was like part of some failed. It's an alternate history book, so he's in part of some failed Mongolian quest, and he goes into Europe. And the premise of the book is the Black Death, instead of wiping out a third of Europe, wiped out 99% of it.
Right.
And so then he's just walking through like these completely decimated European towns.
Right.
Have you got to the part where he gets to essentially Greece and he just finds like the vat of olive oil?
And he just drinks
And
the
he just
olive oil for
spent- he
4
just-
days.
Yeah, he's just there, just eating just a jug because he's starving because there's like nothing.
Yeah.
I'm
It's
just
that
imagining
really
drinking
stuck with-
olive oil for 4 days.
That's just like it's a source of calories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic book. Really recommend it.
Yeah. Wait, actually, I feel like it was only a few podcasts ago that you insisted that you did not read books.
What is real? What is fake? That's the theme of Dreams of Black Mansions, Red Chambers.
Wow.
Ju-
Okay. What?
Well,
Are you going to explain this? Did you read Dream of the Red Chamber?
yeah, I did.
That's a weird and very pornographic book.
Not.
But it was partly pornographic.
Not compared to the one we can't ever remember the name of, the plum
Something
and jade vase
vase
flower.
one.
That one, like, actually.
Yeah. So speaking of, you mentioned that the David Hasselhoff Museum was the sexiest one that you know of.
Oh no, Matt, let's not.
You're right. No, never mind. I won't say it. I shouldn't say it. Let's move on.
Yeah.
I feel like I just like a truck just passed inches in front of me, and I just dodged something.
You definitely dodged something.
Yeah. So, anyways, bullet dodged. You were talking about
Truck
favorite
dodged.
Truck dodged. Yeah, because you probably wouldn't see the bullet. You were talking about most favored nation. I think we got to Matt explaining what that was.
And then we went on this whole thing about companies. So China has had permanent most favored nation trade status since 1999.
The great thing about making it permanent is it really encourages the other partner to really, keep on the straight and narrow.
Well, the thing was that since the Tiananmen Square massacre, what had happened is that every year the trade status of China was reviewed in Congress, and the human rights record would come up, all this stuff, and it's not like they ever rescinded it.
Yeah.
But
they had to approve it each year.
They had to approve it each
Right.
year. And so in 1999, they passed it and were like, okay, we don't need to ever approve this again.
Those hardworking members of Congress had to decide to work a little less.
Yeah, well, I read some of the arguments in the congressional record about it, and Senator Joe Biden was like, this is an important thing for us to do for the people of China, and it wasn't like he was alone, right?
Yeah.
Bill Clinton was pushing for this. This was seen as the great new thing that we were going to do, and then so we passed permanent most favored nation trading status, and then the next year we helped China get into the WTO.
Right. But at least those things turned China into a liberal democracy.
Yeah, definitely worked in so many ways. But so now there's a bill that's been introduced in Congress by members of the Select Committee on the CCP to rescind most permanent most favored nation trade status. And other people are talking about it. Guest of the podcast, Grant Newsham, has written a op-ed in, I think, on Fox News that talks about what we should do with Ukraine, actually. And the comparison he made was like, look at what happened with South Vietnam, and we shouldn't make the same mistake with Ukraine. I believe one of the things that you had wanted to do when we were talking about History Unearthed as a show that we wanted to do, you wanted to do an episode about how the U.S. won the Vietnam War.
I was about to get into that because that's important context for South Vietnam.
Yeah.
Where the war was over. It was essentially like Korea, where it was divided between North and South. War was done. But then American hero Nixon got purged by the filthy forces against him.
This is another one of those things where there are no heroes in the
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, but basically, anti-war Democrats took over Congress and just over the course of years pulled all funding for South Vietnam. Then, like, North Vietnam was like, "Hey, maybe we can start the war. Maybe we can take this." And they slowly encroached. No pushback from the U.S. The president of South Vietnam was begging on TV for the U.S. to do something. I think it was Gerald Ford. Gerald Ford was begging Congress to do something, and they're like, "Nope, nope, we're not going to give any support for South Vietnam." And so the war was lost after the fact, and South Vietnam fell. It did not have to fall. It was pure incompetence by the U.S.
So Grant's argument is that we should not make that same mistake in Ukraine,
Yeah,
where, obviously an endless war in Ukraine is not what anybody wants, but also he was talking about the destabilizing secondary effects of South Vietnam falling too. What happened in Cambodia after
yeah.
that with the Khmer Rouge, like all this stuff that was destabilizing things that were happening in Asia after that. So his point was that whatever happens with Ukraine and Russia, Russia can't come out the winner. Like,
Yeah.
Right.
so that includes that we would have to do things like, deal with Russia, Iran, North Korea, and China, and make sure that they're not able to like support each other into like
Yeah.
this new Axis power.
And his
kind of
main
thing.
point was like, you really don't have to do all that much. Like with the example of True Korea, he said like we could do new sanctions, or we could just enforce the ones that are already there.
Yeah. There's a lot of loopholes in
Yeah.
our or Russia sanctions the same. Like there are a lot of loopholes. With the China thing was what he was saying that revoking most favored nation trade status is like something we should do
Yeah.
because China is supporting Russia in the war
Yeah.
with money and material goods, and it's fairly obvious at this point.
And no North Korean troops are there.
Yeah. So also Iran destabilizing the Middle East, we need to stop funding them.
That would be a good idea.
Yeah.
But
Again,
if you,
sanctions enforcement.
are you sure that
Yeah.
if you give Iran billions of dollars, maybe what they'll do is they'll put them into like social welfare programs for the people.
They
and-
won't use it to fund the nuclear program,
Or
and
even-
also,
or Hamas.
proxy Hamas or
Or
Hezbollah.
even like what Obama did with Project Cassandra, where there was this whole like the FBI was going to blow up I think it was Hezbollah's drug trafficking, and Obama was like, "Stop doing that because I want to make an Iran deal." And Hezbollah is an Iran proxy.
Yeah.
Like, what a stupid thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think
And when people, it makes me mad when people are like, Obama was the only controversy in his presidency is that time he wore a tan suit. It's like, no.
I mean, I really liked Obama. It's just that, like, at the time, because he's so well spoken and like so charismatic.
Well, I mean, he
had the riz, as they say. But yeah, when you look back on some of his stuff, you can see that a lot of those decisions that were made.
there were a lot of foreign policy
really
failures
bad,
that were
yeah.
made at essentially at taking authoritarian regimes at their word.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
He was just too trusting.
yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like with the fentanyl thing. Obama, Trump, Biden both listened to Xi Jinping when he was like, yeah, we'll stop fentanyl. It's not like we're subsidizing it and forcing it on you as part of our drug warfare to destroy you.
But yeah, so Grant, we should put a link to his op-ed.
Oh, yeah, we can do that.
But because he had some interesting ideas for how to deal with Iran, how to deal with Russia. His how to deal with Russia was similar to what he was saying about China, which is like sanction Putin's wealth, and if you cannot get at all of it, then you expose the wealth of the corrupt Russian oligarchy.
Yeah.
The way that he's talked about doing with the CCP,
Yeah.
which it's
Authoritarian leaders do not want truth. They do not want a light shined on their behavior.
yeah.
So that's the
Yeah.
solution.
And the thing that this requires, though, is for, I'll just use America, the American government, the American society is to understand that a war is going on and we actually have to fight it.
It's not just one war, right? There's a lot going on in the world. But you're talking about the CCP
I'm
one?
talking about like this whole collective thing between Russia, North Korea, Iran, China.
The way that they are
They
currently
are
at war
currently
with us.
at war with us. All of these forces want to destroy the United States. And we have to recognize that and actually realize that this is a war and we have to fight back.
Yeah, the fighting back part.
But there's so many ways to fight back that don't involve US
Military,
troops.
yeah, there are plenty of options. I mean, I think this was one of the successes of the first Trump administration with how he helped destroy ISIS by cutting off the money.
I think what's interesting also is there is essentially a foreign policy. I don't know if you want to call it like a theory or belief system among certain foreign policy elite, mostly on the Democratic side, where essentially it's a bad for the US to use. The US is the superpower in the world, but it is bad for the US to use its power because, we're the oppressor and everybody else is the oppressed, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So then this is the point that Drew Pavlou made in a politically incorrect way
He's a
on
delight.
Twitter, where he was like, okay, well, the Sullivan, Blinken, like wimpy. He used another word that I'm not going to use because I don't want YouTube to.
But on our website, would you use it?
Maybe. But he was just talking about how this terrible foreign policy is what's causing a lot of it. He was actually talking about in terms of South Korea, where he was like, the U.S. is South Korea's biggest ally. Like
they could play a role in like the military coup that was going on.
And things like that, but the U.S. is afraid to do anything.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Oh yeah, the context was that Lincoln was like, "Oh, we're expressing great concern over this," and he was like, "The U.S. could do a lot more than just express concern."
Where they're always expressing concern about Iran, about Russia and China and whatever. But yeah, I think there's this caution that is more likely to get us into war than
the U.S. should not use its power. I saw somebody make a point, like complaining online today about how, like, the way Trump is like talking to like Canada and Mexico and all these other powers. It's like he's acting like he's the boss of the world, and it's like, well, the American president. That's kind of what people want.
And I think that this is the antithesis of that, right? The way that the current foreign policy elite is like, oh, well, we want China to join the international
world order,
like the international liberal world order, and be part of the solution, and they're like, they have no interest in being part of the solution. That is not what they want to do, and
they want to be the world police.
Yeah, so it's just. Anyway, it is very frustrating. And interestingly, one of the comments to Drew's post was that someone who was like, I'm a Democrat, but I'm very excited to see Marco Rubio as the next Secretary of State because I hate the way that the Democrats do foreign policy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the obvious solution, and this always works well, is you just got to say that, like, the communists are inside the country, so declare martial law, and then everything solves itself, right?
Yeah. No problems whatsoever. Yeah.
Well, you heard it here first on China Unscripted. I am declaring martial law. I am in charge now.
You apparently had about as much of an ability to declare martial law as the South Korean president.
Yeah. Except I won't rescind this.
Uh-huh.
Rescind.
There you go.
Yeah. I've learned something today.